Hey everyone, John deRoulet, Head of Revenue Management Education here at Wheelhouse. And today we're going to look at some brief data on what we call the Mobile market, but really is Gulf Shores, Alabama. And we're going to take a look at some market data just to see what's going on. We are getting ready to have a market data call. It's really similar to how we do our revenue management roundtables, except we're really focusing in on localized areas. We know there's a lot going on this year, and we want to help our friends and clients in the industry be best prepared for 2025. So if you'd like an invite to this data deep dive call where we're going to pull up data, we're going to talk about strategy, we're going to hear what each other's kind of experiencing in the market, let us know. We'd love to get you on the list. In the meantime, hopefully these tidbits will be helpful for you. So the first thing I kind of want to pull up is just some general trends. We are on the Wheelhouse Market Reports, which, by the way, is a free tool available to everyone. So you can pull this up for any market in the country just by logging in. And looking at the occupancy situation for 2025, we can see that we are seeing some attrition to 2024. Now, from an occupancy perspective, some of those are a little bit in line with 2023, at least in Q1, but we are seeing some pretty big losses. And with March being pretty much over, these are pretty much locked in. Now, I am looking at the entirety of the market, and that's going to include a wide range of properties. So when I do this, I do like to look at kind of what the high performance is. You can see that overall performance for these months has increased quite a bit from around 40% to 60%. And though we do still have some attrition, we don't have quite as much attrition on the occupancy perspective. But still, any attrition on the occupancy perspective is going to be a bit of a concern for people. And I do know that talking to folks, it wasn't until kind of mid Q1 that people started to be concerned in the marketplace that we are going to see that attrition. The question is that going to kind of come forward? Now, if we take a little deeper look at this, one of the things to keep in mind here is we do have a shift in Easter this year. So I'm still looking at my high performance bracket, and that Easter and spring break period is going to look a little different because Easter is already much later. That you probably know. What's interesting to me is if we just look at this Easter time period, it doesn't really look like it's bumping up very high. In fact, the following weeks are a little bit higher. So there maybe is some concern here that this isn't going to drive the same kind of occupancy. And this first week of April still is looking strong despite Easter moving off of, basically this last weekend here. Now, when I put last year's data on top, you do see that last year Easter drove quite a bit of occupancy. That's just not going to appear here. This is looking kind of stable coming in, but I'm still not seeing a big bump for the upcoming Easter. So rather than that revenue just fully moving over, the question is going to be, is that going to come in at all, right? Now, outside of that time period, there is some interesting trends here too. These dates look pretty stable. I mean, these look like they're in range of being able to hit kind of where they were last year. But once we get to about May 2nd, there's some kind of odd trends, right? This date looks pretty strong, but it looked strong last year. This May 17th, 18th is obviously very strong, and it seemed decently strong last year. But then between the 5th and the 13th and kind of, the 21st to Memorial Day, there's definitely some weakness where those dates aren't really popping up on the weekends yet. Now, granted, that may not be as strong of a time, so we may see that come in the short term, but a little bit of concern there. And then even Memorial Day is not quite popping up the way that I would think. So that's something to start to consider is, do adjustments need to be made for Memorial Day? Are people planning to travel that as strong? Because last year, that was a pretty solid buildup, and in fact, even better than the first week of June from an occupancy perspective. But this year, it's kind of flattened out. Like, this trend does not look like it's taking the same shape. Going into June, you see actually quite a bit of a mix. Like, we do have some pretty strong occupancy here. But there's definitely some dips and valleys as well. So something to kind of think about as we get into the summer and really watch our summer pickup. Now, I did pull some really special kind of interesting data for you. So I have a dynamic set built for the kind of Gulf Shores market area. This is adjusted a little bit. I'm making sure to only pick properties that have had pretty, at least decent occupancy over the last year. So I'm trying to really remove the properties that aren't showing anything. And we're really going across all of Gulf Shores and Orange Beach here. So pretty wide range. And what I've done is I've pulled this up in our performance page. So on this, what we can see here is each one of these bars is a day. So if I turn off this green stuff, this is the current occupancy on the books by day for that entire set. And these highlights are just how much of that is sold in the last week. So you can see here, this makes sense, pretty weak beginning of March. These dates in March looked okay, but still sub 80%. And then we're having a little bit of a kick up at the end of the month, which is good, but not quite seeing a ton of sales in the short term here coming into early April. And again, that Easter time period is not really spiking up. Now, what is valuable here is I can actually also see where this was as of same time last year. And that's something you can do in the system now, sneak peek. But when I put last year's data up, so this is for the same set of listings, and it's a pretty big set. We're looking at 972, so it's a pretty solid amount of listings. You can see kind of, obviously this was Easter last year, so it was way, way higher. We're probably not going to make that up. But as we get into April, and especially into May and June, you start to see this lagging in the overall pace on the occupancy. And to me, that's a pretty big red flag after some of the concerns that have been happening really across all of the Gulf markets in March. You can start to see that mid-April, even maybe end of April, you start to see some of this switching where you have some stuff that's actually pacing okay, still not quite on pace with where we were last year. And it's really just kind of degrading, and this gap between green and purple gets bigger and bigger, which means at this time last year, almost all of these dates were pacing a little ahead, at least in this group of listings, which I have limited a little bit. Now, the last thing I'm going to put over here is I'm going to put the average daily rate on top of this. So you can see I now have these lines that are daily rate. And this is kind of interesting to me. So let me come back here and we'll zoom in just on this spot. So in the very short term, you can see that those lines are pretty close to each other, right? In some cases, last year's a little higher, but they're generally like in the same time period. And that goes all the way through that kind of April time period where we're pretty close, maybe even the first week of May. But once we get past the first week of May, you see them start to deviate a little. And the ADRs on the books for properties this year are actually a little bit higher, particularly in this May spot, which is a little bit of a concern. And then especially as we get out here into June, where this really starts to dip down for this year, you see this big deviation out here. So really an opportunity to kind of look, there may be some room to kind of adjust the rate, and you may not have to cut much from what you did last year yet, because it does look like at an aggregate level, the rates are still floating a little bit above where people were last year. But, that being said, it's getting to be a little late. Like having a concerning shock from March, we're already starting into April. These changes need to be put into practice, sooner rather than later. All right. Hope you guys found that helpful. Just a reminder, we are planning a data deep dive call where I'm going to hop on live. We'll pull up this data. I'll pull up special sets for you guys. We'll look into the back end and take a look at booking windows. And we'll have a conversation about what you're planning, what you're expecting, and what your strategies are. If you'd like to join that call, it's going to be a pretty small invite-only intimate call. Please let us know. We'd love to have you join us. And otherwise, hope you found this helpful. Thanks. Bye.